Tactics and strategy have existed in a state of perpetual evolution since the dawn of humanity. In times of war, for ambition or survival. In times of peace, for athletic virtue, and competition through various forms of games. And though the non-athletic variety may seem like a frivolous luxury to the uninitiated, play is a necessary medium for expressing the innate, innermost propensity for competitiveness. In addition, games can also serve as a deeper form of social interaction between competitors who come to know each other on a level deeper than any other form of social communication. All these are factors in why their demand has been consistent throughout the ages. But are competitive games only concerned with the present, that is, a temporary form of entertainment, self-expression, or social contact? Or can they be used as a method of learning, or even advancing, tactical and strategic considerations for tangible forms of battle, like, for example, combat sports? The answer to this question will of course depend on what form of play we are to consider, because like any system in nature, games are dependent on balance. Too much chaos and it becomes less about strategy and more about luck. Too much order and the game can be slow or uneventful. A genre that, for the most part, achieves a medium that encourages strategic, critical thinking in combination with testing capacity for real-time spacing and reactions is fighting games. Now, fighting games may superficially seem like a brainless, button-mashing mess, but in reality, their depth and complexity are the factors that have attributed to their longevity, their competitiveness, and even their sense of community. The FGC is a scene that has developed complex terminology, sophisticated analyses, and even advanced levels of tactics that rival or arguably far surpass any competitive combat sport. But how is this possible? Firstly, competitors of this medium can play hundreds or even thousands of games per week, because the toll these matches take on their bodies is ultimately insignificant, especially when compared to sparring sessions that contribute more to a fighter's CTE than actual amateur or professional bouts. Additionally, fighting game competitions exist worldwide, and there are few, if any, physical limitations that can prevent one from participating. As a result, the number of competitors in casuals and even tournaments is exceptionally massive compared to combat sports. Naturally, you may now be wondering, are these two even comparable? As outrageous as it may seem, many elements do carry over. To elaborate on this argument, we must first see what makes fighting games unique in their potential for allowing self-expression through a mental form of combat. Each fighting game has different rules and mechanics, similar to any combat sport. Boxing will differ from kickboxing, 2D fighters are dissimilar to 3D fighters, and where they are separated is execution, the ability to perform the techniques necessary in order to succeed. For physical combat, this includes strikes, footwork, head movement, or grapples, depending on the sport. In fighting games, it requires inputting the relevant move when necessary to carry out sequenced combinations to fully capitalize off instances where the opponent has provided an opening. But as important as execution rules and mechanics may be, the fundamentals of combat will transcend beyond any of these peculiarities. Therefore, we must focus on these fundamentals. Ultimately, combat is about controlling two essential concepts: space and time, through any means necessary, be it deception or superior maneuverability. Starting with the former, the word tactics etymologically stems from the Hellenic tasso, which means to appoint, assign, or arrange. It refers to the preset arsenal of maneuvers or sets of such that allow one to inflict damage or place one in a position to avoid unfavorable situations. Tactics exist interdisciplinarily, a famous example being business executives who study Sun Tzu's Art of War, a treatise meant for generals and other military leaders. Of course, tactics between combat sports and fighting games transfer optimally, almost unaltered, since they deal with the same basic constructs. Next, we have strategy, from stratos, which means army, and ago, which means to lead. Strategy is all about accomplishing superior maneuverability, where and when to move in real time in order to attain an advantage against an opponent or opponents. Though this is the most fundamental element of combat, it is also the most difficult to master. It requires instinctual execution of technique, a rich repertoire of tactics, an understanding of oneself, and an understanding of one's opponent, because one needs to move not only according to their strengths, but also to their opponent's weaknesses. Although these terms may seem broad and abstract, they can be specified and simplified, something the fighting game community has done brilliantly. Not only understanding and analyzing these concepts, but also categorizing them to evolve the potential praxis of the notions through observation and awareness. And one of the most used terms in fighting games is the ever so ambiguous concept of footsies. Here to give us an understanding of the term is a prominent fighting game competitor, analyst, commentator, and host, David Graham, also known as UltraDavid.
Thanks, Tommy. Look, we in the FGC have been trying to define footsies for literally decades at this point, and nobody's done such a good job of that somebody else can't still disagree. But I would say that footsies basically are about trying to control ranges on screen in ways that lead to your character's win condition, whether that's trying to get in close, whether that's trying to keep the opponent at bay, or whether that's just dealing damage directly at that spot. And a bunch of different things go into that. You have to know what your preferred range is in the first place. What's the spot on screen where you can best control the match? You have to be able to move just in and outside of the opponent's range while staying within your range, or at least within quick access to your preferred range. You have to actively poke or attack. You have to be able to whiff punish well. So if the opponent doesn't know where you are and they try to attack but they miss, you have to be ready to quickly punish that before they can attack, or before they can block, or before they can escape. And then lastly, you have to be able to predict well. You have to be able to guess where and when the opponent will be and when they'll attack. And all in all, footsies are, a combination of all three aspects of fighting game play. So strategic choices in terms of where, when, and why to attack and move. Tactics in terms of which actual movements do you choose in doing that. And then execution in terms of being able to react quickly if the opponent does whiff something, or in terms of being able to execute well and get a lot of damage when you do have the opportunity. This takes planning and knowledge and adaptation and concentration. And if you're fighting against one of the fighting game masters, I'll tell you, good luck ever getting past this stage of the fighting game match, because believe me, I have tried.
Though David spoke of footsies in terms of fighting games, these concepts are far from being foreign to anyone who has practiced striking in martial arts. The terminology may differ, but walking someone down, pokes, hitting an opponent that's vulnerable after a missed strike, or learning to recognize an incoming Hail Mary are all rudimentary concepts of sparring. And despite appearing simple, knowing how to be aware of, as well as when and how to apply them in combat, requires the highest level of understanding of the mind games associated with battle. Take one of these elements as an example: pokes. A poke is a strike meant to inflict damage to an opponent by either penetrating their defense, hitting them while they're advancing, or striking them during the vulnerable startup of their own pokes. But this strike can lose throughout every phase of the movement. During its startup, by the opponent's poke. During its recovery, by a whiff punish. During its peak, by a counter. And even if it lands, it can essentially lose to a superior strike or haymaker that trades with the opponent. Therefore, to know when to throw a poke, one must have a sense of their own and their opponent's rhythm, understand beats and how and when to skip them, how to recognize when someone is fishing for a counter, and, most importantly, when to be patient and not throw the poke. Each and every one of these abilities apply both in physical combat as well as in fighting games. This is why there is merit in the idea that combat athletes have much to learn from what we despairingly refer to as video games. They have deep and complex systems and classifications of combative elements that can be groundbreaking for fight sports. Add to this the real-time spacing, timing, and reactions required, and fighting games become a sort of combat in a vacuum, or fighting in ideal conditions, based purely on mind games. An exercise that a fighter can practice even during their leisure and recovery. Of course, the thesis does have its limitations. Fighting games are a far more simplified form of combat. There's no need to worry about weight distribution, leverage, or optimal strike ranges. There are a limited number of angles from which one can attack, as well as a limited moveset. More importantly, they lack the impulsive emotions that arise from physical pain, exhaustion, fear, and one's survival instinct, which are all factors of the complexity of the struggle that surfaces in any situation that requires physical self awareness. However, one would not need to expect to gain in every aspect of combat from a single training method. These can all be applied and honed through sparring and competition, fields of which fighting game players can also practice and learn and benefit from the physicality and athleticism that result from this training. This is why it is clear that the gap between these two disciplines, fighting games and combat sports, is only artificial, one that deserves a bridging for the betterment of both communities. Before I go, many thanks to UltraDavid, who was very helpful and a pleasure to collaborate with. Make sure to follow him on his social media for fighting game insights or to know which event he'll be commentating next. Cheers, everyone.